I've always said from the more than 50,000 hours worth of research that I've dug into that have never been proven to be safe. They don't keep you from getting sick. They are not necessary. Well, your baby is born with two types of immune systems. The first immune system that it's born with is called the innate immune system. So that's the one as soon as they come out, whether they're born vaginally or by a C-section, that is already there. They scan your blood 24/7 your entire life. That's your innate immune system. When they find something that isn't supposed to be there, they whistle, they put out a whistle, they go, hey, come on over here, guys. White blood cells, come in here and take care of this. When we give a child we're injecting foreign matter and forcing a 2, 4, and 6-month-old baby's adaptive immune system into a place that it was never intended to go. When you inject foreign matter into the human body, it's only by nature, by what you've just injected into the body, going to wreak havoc. Well, first and foremost is your relationship with God. Your spirituality, if you have things in line with your walk with Jesus and your relationship with God, and follow the 10 Commandments, which really tell you a lot. A lot of these other things will be taken care of. You can always, you can never Take your time. Know that any one of those injections can be a life-altering event, even death, to one of your kids. God has given you 2 immediate gifts. The first gift is that you got pregnant. The second gift is you've got somewhere between 3 and 6 months to get ready for this new life. It's going to be in your hands.
All the controversy with COVID vaccines, are they the only bad one? Are the only vaccines getting negative press? The answer is no. All vaccines, there's problems, and I have the expert who's been at this longer than anyone I know, and I'm telling you, she has been through it all. She has been called every name in the book. She has been called anti-science, of course, anti-vax. But I'm telling you, this doctor has answers that most people don't. In her new book, wait till you hear about that. But controversy all over the show. You're going to want to stay tuned because you're going to get some answers in truth right here. Dr. Sherry Tenpenny is my guest. Welcome to the show. And of course, my lovely wife, Marilee, who had to be here for this show because of all the controversy that you're about to hear. Now, listen, we're going to uncover it and you're going to want to share this show. I'm going to tell you that right at the top because we're going to dig where other shows aren't going to dig on this topic. You are an absolute authority on this subject, more than most. I mean, I have interviewed Del Bigtree here. I have interviewed Peter McCullough, many others, and they all respect you for your wisdom on this topic.
Well, I think mostly it's because I've been doing it the longest. I've been doing this for 25 years. September of 2000 is when I started into this. And it's kind of funny because a lot of people, particularly younger people, have been saying to me, you're the OG.
You are.
And when I first heard that, I thought, does that mean old goat? Yeah. I'm the oldest person. Does that mean the old? And they said, no. It's the original gangster. It's just because I've been doing it the longest and been digging into it and never wavered from all the things that I've said. I didn't hedge and say, well, maybe this is okay or maybe that's okay. I've always said from the more than 50,000 hours worth of research that I've dug into that vaccines have never been proven to be safe. They don't keep you from getting sick. They are not necessary, and every single one causes harm at some level, even if it's just at the cellular level. It's a 200-year multi-generational mistake that now we're finally getting people, getting critical mass of people understanding that.
That's why I want you to share the show, because people are open to this. Because of COVID, they reached too far, and it backfired on them, right? They literally, I believe, really have damaged the sacred cow of vaccines. They really did. And that's why I think this show, the timing of this show is so good. But, all the other guests, they wouldn't have said what you just said, meaning all the other guests, I think, would argue, like they almost kind of speak like there's some place for vaccines, right? If only we could make them safer. You don't believe that?
I don't, because when you inject foreign matter into the human body, it's only by nature, by what you've just injected into the body, going to wreak havoc. When you inject aluminum, all these chemicals, when you inject lots of foreign proteins by all these animal cells, aborted fetal cells, bovine, fetal bovine serum. So almost all the viral vaccines
and all
have.
that's in vaccines?
Almost all the viral vaccines have cow blood, chicken parts.
Yeah. Was it
dog
monkey
kidney
pus?
cells?
Wasn't it monkey pus or something?
Monkey kidney cells.
Okay.
All of those are foreign proteins. And whenever you inject a foreign protein, you get an inflammatory response. And so it's...
But by the way, that's how I'm putting quotes on it, work, is to get an inflammatory response. Meaning they have to create the immune system to be all up in arms and excited. Otherwise, you couldn't take a dead virus and get an immune reaction and make an antibody.
Well, you wouldn't, if you just took that immune virus or that attenuated virus and injected it, you're not going to get anything. That's why you have to have all of those foreign proteins and all the aluminum. And the fetal bovine serum is probably one of the most disgusting particles that's in there. And it's in almost every viral vaccine because you need that serum, that cow serum, for them to be able to replicate, for the viruses to be able to replicate. And how they extract that blood from those fetal cows is just disgusting. It's like, where is PETA when you need them?
Yeah.
I mean, they...
Right?
Yeah, are they protesting vaccines? I don't think so.
I don't think so either.
No. And what about the abortion people? Because not in every vaccine, but how many still have aborted fetal tissue in them?
The rubella vaccine, which is part of the MMR, the hepatitis A, chickenpox, and shingles. And I think that most adults need to know that it's part of the shingles vaccine or cells from aborted fetal tissue.
Yeah. And so all the up in arms and all where are they at? Right. It's like, because that stuff is in the vaccines, which problem number one. And we're kind of going after the two big problems that I have, right? Of course, the amount of toxins that are in a vaccine, number one, big problem, right? But this is probably the part of the conversation that most people don't understand, is that avoiding these childhood, we don't want to call them diseases, right? Childhood infections is problematic in itself. And that's maybe most of my listeners, watchers, that's the first time they ever heard that. You're saying, so wait a minute, what you're saying, Dr. Pompa, is measles, mumps, rubella, chickenpox, pertussis, these are good for my child? And the answer is...
Yes. And particularly measles. Now, people say, well, oh my gosh, you hear all this stuff about measles. Well, what is measles? It's a fever, a cough, a rash, some diarrhea. And sometimes after you have the high fever, you have something that's called desquamation, which is like peeling off the skin off of the palms and soles of your feet, which is the marker of when the infection ends. And the measles, when you normally get measles, is somewhere between 7 and 9 years of age.
That's important, by the way.
That's really important. And what they found is that people that have had, there's several parts of this, that have had natural measles seem to have a lower incidence of brain tumors as they get older. When you have natural measles, particularly in third world countries, the antibody that comes through your breast milk to protect the very young, which is the ones that should be protected the most from measles, the antibody levels are higher, stronger, and more concentration. There was a study that was done on that, like in the early 1990s, and as far as I know, I was the only one that was ever done that actually looked at breast milk from mothers that had had natural measles versus mothers that had had an MMR vaccine, and compared the antibodies to the measles in each one of those. And it was much more robust in mothers that had had natural measles infection. So particularly in third world countries where they don't have like the type of medical care that we have, that's really very, very important. There's also that when you have that high fever at 7 to 9 years of age, it locks in your basement membranes of your tissues, which then starts to clearly define you as a human being of self versus non-self. Like if something gets injected or gets into our body, that's non-self, and I need to get rid of it. So like when we always get bacteria in our bodies every single day from the foods we eat, from brushing our teeth, from having sex, from having a bowel movement, from cutting your fingers. And the body's learned that we need to take care of that. That's non-self. And when you lock in the basement membranes in your lungs and particularly your kidneys, so you know which is you and and which is not you. So that really high fever that you get is not, it's not bad. In fact, it's something I talk about quite a bit. There's actually a little ebook that we've created. It's called The Importance of Fever. Like, what does fever do? It turns on your immune system. It makes it work. It gets rid of stuff. And it's not about how high the fever is. What I talk about in that ebook is that you need to understand when fever becomes a problem. It's not how high it is, because you've heard this too. Parents say, "Oh, the fever was 105." Yeah. It's like, but they're still running around the living room and playing with toys.
Every time he had a fever, it was 105 every time.
But they were running around the living room and eating and drinking.
Well, the next day,
exactly.
Yeah.
So you got a big spike. It did what it was supposed to do, and it left.
Yep.
It locks in the basement membranes. It got rid of the bacteria. It got rid of the viruses. And when it's persistent, like if you have that 105 fever for 3 or 4 or 5 days, it wears you out. It fatigues your immune system. It can, in little younger children, cause dehydration, and then that's when it becomes a problem. And so in the ebook, I talk about that, and they actually have, there was actually 2 studies that were done that they questioned parents about what did they know about fever. Well, we know that fever's bad, and we know that if it gets high, it's really dangerous. And that in the papers, they talked about the problem with that is actually the pediatricians who will say to you, if they get a fever, you better call me.
Yeah.
And they instill that sense of fear and dis-ease about having the fever. Yep. And that they also learned in these studies that parents, because they don't know about fever, they think that the fever is going to go from 101 to 105 to 107 to 112, and they're going to spontaneously combust right before them. So I talk a lot about what parents need to know, and it's just a simple little ebook.
Where can they access that? Because I find educating parents all the time, we get into this conversation, bring down the fever. You want to it's the worst thing you can do. It prolongs the illness, right?
100%.
So people need to be educated on that. Where's that resource?
On Amazon.
Okay. And what would the title? It's called
The Importance of Fever.
Okay.
Or they can also get get it on our website, which is, our main website is dr10penny.com under the educational tab. Okay. We have all of the different books and stuff that I've written there.
Good resource, parents.
Absolutely.
dr10penny.com. And how many books have you written?
I've written 3 or 4 major books and, I don't know, half a dozen or so ebooks, smaller types of books about the importance of measles, about, why measles is important, why you shouldn't fear measles. Measles is another one, kind of like pertussis, that has this life cycle. You have these outbreaks of measles about every 4 to 5 years, irrespective of vaccination rate. Right. You have outbreaks of pertussis, which is a bacterial infection, every 3 to 5 years, documented by
No matter what, this is going to happen. You'll never vaccinate this away.
But documented by the World Health Organization as recently as 2015. The World Health Organization said, we see these outbreaks every 3 to 5 years. And so we see a lower pertussis rate, not because of vaccines, but because people are paying closer attention to it. And we just see these cycles every 3 to 5 years, which gives the public health department a chance to get hysterical in the media and get people out to vaccinate their kids.
Well, remember when Simon was in 3rd grade here, there was the outbreak, right, of measles. And they called me because he had an exemption, and they said, you're going to have to take, what did they want me to take? And what's that one antibiotic that you take for just like 3 days or 5 days or something? I forget what the name of it.
I just thought that he shouldn't show up to school.
Well, no, they said he could take that, or he had to stay home for a month. I said, he'll stay home for a month. And I also educated them
on vitamin A.
And I said, interestingly enough, before the outbreak is when everyone's contagious. There's an outbreak. He's been exposed. He has siblings at school also. There's no concern. I'm not concerned. And so I think if people thought more about the way they play the game and how they try to instill this fear or get this reaction from people that are, I don't want to say dissenting, we're just educated and we know the truth. And so but they try to get this reaction from us for compliance and conformity, and it's just completely erroneous.
Even the World Health Organization says worldwide, and they've said this since 2005, that if they're going to do a vaccination campaign with the MMR vaccine, that they should give vitamin A 2 days before they get the MMR vaccine, so that they don't have as big a side effects.
Okay.
Well, when people have an outbreak, it's usually a vitamin A deficiency, and if you treat them with vitamin A, it neutralizes out the virus, and they get better a whole lot faster. And so it's just
I would add vitamin D in there too. While
exactly.
You're at it. Yeah.
But remember at the beginning of right after Secretary Kennedy was confirmed, and it was like, oh, there's this measles outbreak because you, Bobby Kennedy, have said things against vaccines all these years. And, at the cabinet meeting, he said, well, there were 15 outbreaks of measles this year. Or last year, was the year before. It was like, and did the media make a big hysterical thing about that? No. And again, they're making a big hysterical thing about this 156% increase in the outbreak of pertussis in Florida because of all the unvaccinated people. Well, when you really read those numbers, the 156 went from like 750 some to like 1,500 cases. There's 33 million children in Florida under the age of 15. So 1,500 kids with a cough illness is going to, create all kinds of havoc. And they want to blame the unvaccinated. And I told you about that study that was done in 2014. There was an outbreak of pertussis in California. And they, after the fact, the CDC crunched all the numbers. There were a little over 2,000 kids that had an outbreak of pertussis. There were 2,006, actually. And of the 2,006, 2,001 were treated at home. 5 ended up in the hospital. 4 of them for less than 2 days. 1 for less than 5 days. There were no deaths. 87% of those kids were fully vaccinated, meaning they had all 5 doses of DPT when they were children and a teenage booster. And only 36 kids of that 2006 were completely unvaccinated.
Well, you're always hearing the measles outbreak is in the unvaccinated,
but it's not.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah.
So how do you combat, because at a certain point, I'm sure you understand how people are met with, okay, so it's better for my kid to have that measles vaccine than to, even though it's not necessarily something to be super concerned about when they're young, but what about the older person, the grandparent that child's exposing by not being vaccinated because they think the vaccine's working, right? That is just what people believe.
Well, the assumption is that like sitting in this room, that is just swirling with pathogens that are just waiting to jump on us and cause us to get sick.
That's right?
And that's the assumption.
Yeah.
Right.
Which isn't true. And then
there's pathogens here.
Yeah, but they're not waiting to just jump on us, right? And the other thing is there are vaccines for about 16 to 20 different conditions. Some of the conditions aren't in the routine pediatric poisoning schedule is what I call it now. Like things like typhoid and cholera and Japanese encephalitis virus. Things that they give overseas or that they give to our military, but they don't give to our kids. But there's thousands, maybe tens or hundreds of thousands of viruses and bacteria out there. And they don't vaccinate against them. And sometimes they cause illnesses. They cause, with influenza, they call it non-influenza influenza. So it's caused by something other than an influenza virus. And so actually that's the thing about influenza is that the CDC has about 120.
Well, I guess COVID would fall under that. It's a non-influenza.
Yeah, exactly. That's good. Yeah. They have about 120 testing centers around the U.S. So if you have like what seems to be the flu, cough, runny eyes, deep chills, which separates it from a cold. You have the fever and deep chills and you really feel systemically unwell. So if you go to one of these testing centers and they swab your nose and your throat and they stick it in a little container and they send it off to the CDC to be tested. The CDC tests about 600,000 of those swabs a year. And when it first comes in, they pull it out. The first thing that they test when it comes in is they test it to say, is this person ill from an influenza virus or from something else? And so, and if they test it, it's positive for influenza, they subtype it.
A and B.
And well, not only A or B, but the 3 different types. There's 4 viruses in the influenza vaccine. So there's 2 A's and 2 B's, and they see if those subtypes match the ones that are in the vaccines. And that's when we hear it on the news. It's been a good match, or it's not such a good match this year, or whatever. That's how they test that. So that swab that comes in, the first thing that they do is they go influenza or not influenza. 86% of the time, that illness is caused by something else. So that means 14% of the time over a 20-year period where I crunched all this data, over 20 years, on average, just about 14% of that illness in a season is caused by influenza viruses. So...
And there's like 18 different ones.
There's hundreds of them. There's hundreds and hundreds of them. If you ever saw like the viral genome little algorithm that tells you all the different ways that they are all connected. So that means that if you believe that flu shots work, and I got to get my flu shot to keep me from getting sick, it's going to keep you from getting sick about 14% of the time. That's going to match what's happening out there in the environment.
I mean,
but that's statistically, but it's even actually less than that. You're right.
If you took it for face value,
exactly.
We're literally, it was one of these. But to our point, all these influenzas exist, and if you don't nail that, it's not doing anything.
Yeah, and the influenza doesn't do anything for that other 86 types of illness.
I think it's worth you explaining how vaccines work, because if you understand that when you get an illness, a childhood illness, measles, mumps, rubella, chickenpox, you get a lifetime immunity because of the type of immune system that gets, stimulated, But when you get the vaccine, you're getting a Th2 reaction, which is an emergency reaction. It's not the way it works. And that's part of the problem. So kind of explain that for people, because when you and I made the argument that we believe that childhood infections are healthy for our children. And in the old days, my parents sent me down to get measles, mumps, rubella. They did. And we got them. And, or half the time you didn't get them, but you still build immunity because you got exposed and your immune system figured it out.
Exactly.
Right. So we believe that the old fashioned way believe that. Today, it's not the case, but we wanted lifetime immunity, but that's not what a vaccine does.
No. And I think that it's partly because pediatricians tell a new mom or dad, they come in and they say, well, your baby's born without an immune system. We have to vaccinate, which is a flat out lie. Your baby's born
God made a mistake is what that says in my brain.
100%. Well, your baby is born with 2 types of immune systems. The first immune system that it's born with is called the innate immune system. So that's the one, as soon as they come out, whether they're born vaginally or by a C-section, that is already there. And it has the major vigilant proteins are called toll-like receptors, spelled TOLL -like, toll-like receptors, which cover the surface of every organ. And I look at them as little like radar sonars that are looking at the bacteria or viruses or flagella, protozoans, and things like that are not supposed to be there, that they scan your blood 24/7 your entire life. That's your innate immune system. And when they find something that isn't supposed to be there, they whistle, they put out a whistle, they go, hey, come on over here, guys. White blood cells, come in here and take care of this. This is happening in our bodies 24/7 all day long. We don't even know it. Our body's just taking care of it. That's the innate system that your body's born with. What happens is that when you get exposed to things like dogs, cats, peanuts, horses, hay, grass, your body then develops what's called an adaptive immune system. And in a healthy human, in a healthy body, they look at that and go, yeah, that's foreign. Okay, no big deal. It's not going to cause me any problems. I don't have to react to it. I don't have to get my IgG antibodies and all this stuff. I just recognize that that's foreign. That's the adaptive immune system. When we give a child a vaccine and we're injecting foreign matter, which is what it is, into this body, we're pushing the body to now start making antibodies and start recognizing, well, wait a minute, that's not not supposed to be here. That's foreign. I better develop a reaction to it, and I'm going to develop food allergies and environmental allergies and all these other things, and eczema and asthma and all that stuff, because you're injecting the body and forcing a 2, 4, and 6-month-old baby's adaptive immune system into a place that it was never intended to go. It overrides the innate immune system, which they call Th1. And that's why children develop what they call atopic diseases, which is asthma, allergies, eczema, ADD, ADHD, insulin-dependent diabetes, autoimmune diseases, a long list of neurologic diseases. So you feel vaccines
is driving most of, not all of those conditions.
Because it's called, then when they get this atopic disease, they call it Th2 dominant. So you got these big antibodies that are suppressing and pushing down and not allowing the Th1, the innate, natural, normal immune system to do what it's intended to do.
Th1 gives you lifetime immunity.
100%.
Which that's why we made the argument that we feel it prevents cancer, brain tumors, all these other things, like all autoimmune. I've read articles how they believe that Th1 immune response prevents those conditions.
Another thing that happens with that
does not give you lifetime immunity.
No, I want to just interject with that, because you asked me about when you get a natural infection. Well, a natural infection of measles, mumps, chickenpox, whatever, is it gets into your body, and initially your Th1 immune system says, hey, there's something in here that's not supposed to be here. It calls in the white blood cells, the macrophages and all that stuff. And when it does its best to suppress that, and when it can't, when it's too big of a load, or there's too much replication or things going on, it calls in its own innate immune system, and the two of them have a dance. Your Th1 innate immune system has this dance that goes along, and then eventually neutralizes that pathogen. It's like a full court press, and they bring in the fire chief and all this other stuff, and they put it all out. Now the antibodies are late to the game. They're the ones that clean up the mess after the fight and the fire has been going on, and they're the ones that say, okay, we're not going to ever let this happen again. And so that's when you have an innate immune system, or you have a developed antibody, long-term immune system, lifetime immunity, because you've had this dance that went on between your Th1 and your Th2 system, between your innate and your adaptive. When you don't have the innate immune system involved, and you just inject this stuff to create antibodies, that's why antibodies fade over time. That's why you can have very high antibody levels and still contract the infection. And that applies to tetanus too.
I believe, and I'm a toxin guy, telling people toxins are making them sick, but I believe that's the bigger problem with vaccines, is right there, what you just eloquently explained, how it overrides the natural system that God put in place. And that's why we're seeing all this autoimmune, all these childhood cancers. We're seeing a rise. When we look at what happened in the last 50, 60 years of all these chronic illnesses just driving into the younger generation like we've never seen, I think that's the problem.
I do too. In fact, we made a little meme about this when Secretary Kennedy was talking about that 76% of children now have chronic disease. So we made this little meme that said high vaccination rate plus low infection rate equals 76% of children having chronic disease. Because the only thing that our public health department worries about is infections. It's like, if we've got low infection rates, then everything's okay.
Yeah, I see it the opposite.
Shouldn't the public health have something more to do than just low infection rates? What about these 76% of kids that have all this chronic disease?
Real quick, we raised our kids with a philosophy that infections are good, your body's getting healthier. And that's 100%. Why our kids get sick and they do nothing about it, because we're not treating anything. I'm getting stronger.
And I will say, like, you know the difference. Our kids weren't like seepy, weepy. They weren't discontent. I mean, they, of course, you adjusted them periodically and and that's the way babies are supposed to be. And it's heartbreaking to me. I mean,
you see babies nowadays and that are unvaccinated babies. They're bright and inquisitive and they're head on their milestones and they don't have chronic ear infections and they're not cranky and they don't have snotty nose and you see them and parents, because they're not that common, and parents will go, oh, your baby must be
lucky.
They must be a genius. And I'll say, no, they're
just
normal.
It it's become so disproportionate though.
It is. And when you talk to parents that sometimes, I used to speak at a lot of chiropractic conventions, and some of the chiropractors would come up to me and say, you could do a study just on my family. You know, I have 6 kids. The first 3 kids are fully vaccinated. I wised up, and my second 3 kids are completely unvaccinated. Same genetics, same food, same laundry detergent, same everything.
Yeah.
All the allergies and all that, none.
And the younger kids are easy to get along with. They do well in school. They're socially easier. The kids are cranky and they don't get along as well, and they struggle in school. And I've heard that story dozens and dozens of times in different circumstances.
So why do you think the pediatricians are, and maybe you know this, what is happening behind the scenes that prevents them from really being okay with being questioned by a new parent?
Great question.
You know, if a new parent comes into their office and someone that we're really close to just had this experience, and the doctor literally shamed them. She did not get the vitamin D shot just right out of the gate. Vitamin K, right out of the gate. And they were so, well, your baby could die of a brain bleed. Okay, were you dropping your baby on its head in the next 72 hours? I mean, there's just such I just don't understand, like, why. First of all, they don't want the questions, and they don't, they won't even answer. She asked, she said, is there a black box warning on vitamin K? And just wouldn't even, just dismissed her. And so, of course, she asked me, she said, so what should I do about having a pediatrician? I said, well, honestly, find a good chiropractor in your area.
100%. I
said, I'll ask the question, but quite on. And also, we raised how many families in our office for 17 years that now they're having children and doing exactly what they learned from us. And every once in a while, someone's reaching out with I am so thankful for what I learned from you. And so how do you, that would be your recommendation, right? Find a great chiropractor.
Well, there's a whole bunch
I
of
wanted her to
questions
answer
in
that
there.
first question, though.
There's a whole bunch of questions in there.
About the pediatrician.
Yeah, I know. I was like, wait a minute.
There's
hold
a
on a
ramble.
second.
I'm just, because that starts to emotionally charge me. But yeah,
the first question, what is it that pediatricians don't want? Why is this so emotional for them? Why are they don't want to hear it?
It goes back historically. It goes back to, I do this talk on the history of mandatory vaccination, which the first mandatory vaccination was in 1863 in the UK for the smallpox vaccine. That same year was the beginning of the anti-vaccination movement. It was called Our Baby's Battle because they were arm vaccinating these 3-month-old babies, and many of them were dying of gangrene or sepsis. So it was the same thing that's happening now. When babies are vaccine injured, the parents get active. And so we didn't start having medical schools as we know them until about the 1950s. But between 1863 and 1950, this evolution of developing more vaccines, it felt like it was the first thing that doctors could do. It was a procedure they thought they could do to improve health, which of course it never did. And so I always talk about that the DNA of the medical profession is interwoven into the concept of vaccination, and from the very beginning, because we in the 20s and 40s we had more vaccines. We developed tetanus, pertussis, all of these vaccines that were developed and used during that time during World War I. And then we got into medical schools, and then we were having all these vaccines. And up until 1986, there were only 3. There was MMR, DPT, and polio. So that was all you really needed to know. And the vaccines were good, and they eliminated illness, and they were the best thing to save humanity and all this stuff. So they truly believe it. It's really a religion. They honestly believe that they're doing God's work and saving these children.
Right.
And they really, truly
and they're
believe
close-minded,
that.
Clearly, though.
And there's no cracking that skull open. It's like sometimes I look at their skulls like an egg, and it goes starts to crack open.
Yeah.
Because if they started to question vaccines, they'd have to question all of it.
Yeah.
They'd have to question the entire pharmaceutical paradigm.
That's how I feel.
And all of those things. And so they're not going to. And the second part of that question, what do I think about where should parents take their kids? a good chiropractor that knows how to take care of kids, naturopaths, family docs that really, are willing to work with you.
That must be a short list.
A nurse practitioner. And I think even better than that, go talk to your mother or your grandmother or your aunts or somebody in your yoga class or somebody that you know from your church that has raised children, and that they would be able to look at this brand new little baby and say, oh, that's nothing.
Okay. Well, on that note, while that grandmother might not be concerned about some of the other, vaccines that we're all talking about that are obvious over the years, but what about this? One of her concerns is RSV. So what
why would that be a concern?
I don't know. I think because of just the media propaganda. It's RSV season.
RSV, all children, up until they had a vaccine, because remember, any of these infections only become a major concern once we have a vaccine for them.
Yeah.
If we don't have a vaccine for them.
We need to explain that too.
The RSV is it's like a cold. And historically, by the age of 2, all children have had RSV at least once. And the only time you need to worry about RSV at all is if you have preemies or micropreemies, because the respiratory infection can be too much for them. And it really tires them out and dehydrates them because they can't cough, because they're little teeny tiny little things.
Right.
But if they're in the NICU, when are they going to get exposed to that?
Right.
And when we start vaccinating these babies in NICU, I just want to become the McDonald's murderer or something.
Yeah.
And quit killing all these people. It's like, it's so unnecessary. But RSV is not a concern.
And
it's an immune power.
And this is a breastfed feeding baby, right?
Yeah, 100%.
And I mean, we always took our babies out like right from the start. I mean, we didn't wait. It's kind of like the puppies, right? People are saying, keep your puppies home until they're this age and they're fully vaccinated. I'm like, oh my gosh, that just pierces my heart. I mean, it just makes no sense.
Seriously.
Yeah.
So when we look at when kids get these illnesses, you made a point earlier that measles between the ages of 7 to 9. And one of the problems is they're vaccinated. So we already said that a vaccine does not give you permanent immunity. So that means, let's say we vaccinate them, force up antibodies, this emergency reaction, prevent the child getting this illness, this infection, at that time. Problem is now we set them up to get it at the wrong time. And that can be the deadly part of it.
Well, at least more serious. I don't know that I would necessarily say deadly.
Yeah, I mean, it's someone who's immune compromised, perhaps. But yes, more serious condition.
Fortunately, measles is not around that much. I mean, even pertussis, if we've gone from 156% increase from 750 to 1,580 kids or something, it's not these infections aren't around as much. Chickenpox, that was a really big deal. That if you got chickenpox when you were older, but chickenpox is, I don't even know why we still vaccinate for chickenpox. There's some nominal number of chickenpox outbreaks per year because for the varicella virus, humans are the only known host. And so because we've been vaccinating for this since 1995 now, and because I don't even know why we're still doing it. I don't know why we're doing still polio.
Sure you do.
Theoretically,
logically,
medically,
it makes no sense.
Because polio has not been in the Western Hemisphere since 1991. And it's been certified for polio-free since 1994.
But people will argue it's because of the vaccine, Dr.
But
Sheriff.
What are you vaccinating against? You're giving 4 doses.
But they're saying that the reason you're saying there's nothing to vaccinate against is because the vaccines eradicated
its job,
it.
right?
Right. So it's eradicated. When do we stop? Is the point. When do we decide that we're going to stop? There's something like 7 countries in the world.
I think they believe that if we don't vaccinate, it's going to come back.
Well, there's a little bit of truth to that because there have been lots of papers that have written about the fact that since we're still using the oral polio vaccine with the live virus in it, actually there was 3 live viruses in all the polio vaccines. One of those viruses have been completely eradicated off the planet. It doesn't even exist anymore, but we still give it anyways. And there have been lots of studies, particularly that came out of India, pediatricians in India saying, as long as we are still using the oral polio vaccine anywhere in the world, we are never going to eliminate polio. Because even here in the US, we stopped using the live polio or the live polio vaccine, the drops. I believe it was in 2001 when we converted over to the injectable polio vaccines, because the only people that were contracting polio at that point in time were downstream from people that had gotten an oral polio vaccine. So it ended up in the diapers and things like that. There was the last fully adjudicated case about polio infection in the U.S. was early 2000s or maybe 1998, 99. We stopped using it because that was how we were transmitting it.
Yeah.
So we're still transmitting it.
But but here's the thing. We hit on something. I think really, I think we hit on the sacred cow of why vaccination is so important here, because they're saying that if we could just get everybody to vaccinate, we'll eradicate measles like we did polio. Now, we think we should never do that because there's purpose in these infections. However, they're still under the assumption that the vaccine eradicated polio, but many argue or smallpox, right? But that's simply not the case when you talk to really people who understand infectious disease. So the vaccine didn't eradicate it. They're saying it was the way it was spread is what changed. Plumbing, infection, all the stuff. I mean, it was, if you look at how cities worked, literally filth was going in the street. So, the sanitary conditions changed, and that's really the difference. So talk about that. There
was a paper that was published in 2004 by Harvard researchers that actually looked at the decrease of infectious diseases, infections, particularly things like typhoid and cholera that eradicated completely.
Right, where are those?
When in the 1940s, when we started adding a little bit of chlorine to the water in the water filtration, it went away within 5 years. It was just gone.
Yeah.
And so, which is another thing.
So basically, we're taking away the means of transfer.
But in that paper in 2004, after they'd done this, it's like, 12, 14 page long paper. It was pretty good analysis. The conclusion was of these 2 Harvard researchers that wrote the paper that what changed the infection patterns in the world was not vaccines. It was pure water. Was water filtration and the water filtration systems and hygiene and public sanitation.
So we would argue those types of conditions that you just mentioned, typhoid, et cetera, polio, they're different than measles, mumps, rubella, et cetera, which will always be part of humanity.
Well, it's the difference between, when you mentioned polio, it's a gastrointestinal infection. Overseas it's injected by, it's not injected, it's the oral form. So the transmission is different from that. Whereas measles or chickenpox or rubella is a respiratory virus. And the same thing, we've been giving flu shots for how many years now? Since 1957, maybe before that.
There's no eradicating. It's part of humanity.
Exactly.
Yeah. And it changes.
And it changes every year. You got to change the viruses and tweak them.
And you still can.
And up until Secretary Kennedy just removed this year the mercury from the flu shots.
Time. Yeah.
Every year forever, going backwards, people that got flu shots, particularly if they got multi-dose flu shots, got doses of mercury.
And that's ethyl mercury that crosses right into the brain, by the way.
Do you think they've really thrown away all those lots with the mercury?
No, we're still getting them. We're still getting them.
In 2004, when Congress gave the order to remove mercury from the childhood vaccines, they didn't pull them off the shelf.
Right.
They all went away by attrition. As we used them or as they expired, they went away. Same thing with flu shots, right? Yep. So if they've already been produced for this year's flu season, they're going to use them. Yep. And I always talk about the flu season. It's not even a flu season. It's a sugar season.
Yeah,
right?
so we did a video
we said
joking.
that. Yep.
Yeah, you look at what it starts with Halloween,
right?
Yeah, and then it goes to Thanksgiving then Christmas, and then it's the alcohol season,
and then it's New Year's, and then everybody's like their immune system's worn down from the stress and all the sugar, and then they get sick, and they say, well, it's the flu season. The influenza influenza viruses, they don't migrate. They don't have like birds that migrate south and come back in the north and things like that. Yeah. So it's 100% sugar season.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's just so just very frustrating that people don't think about this topic, even just with logic. If you look at certain things just very logically and even take a review of the last year or the last few years, and then even with COVID, add that to the mix. And you can just see that nothing that was told to us is working the way they said it would. None of it.
Yeah.
And so now we're dealing with children on a massive scale with, speak to peanut allergies. Speak to why there's a peanut allergy, because a lot of people don't understand that comes through.
Yeah, I'm not sure that, Heather Fraser's stuff about, peanut oil being in the vaccines, that was, I think, for a very short period of time. Okay. I don't think that that's what's causing peanut. It's not because there's peanut oil in the vaccines. It's just because of the disruption of the immune system, all the aluminum and all that stuff, that people need to get that aluminum out. 60% of all the aluminum that you're exposed to, whether it be from vaccines or orally or from the air or whatever, 60% gets stored into your bones. Now think about that children get, by the time the main way that you detox aluminum from your body is through your kidneys. The glomerular filtration rate, how well the kidneys filter in children, doesn't even get active until they're 2 years of age. Like really active, like maximized. By the time they're 2 years of age, they will have had 4,700 micrograms of aluminum injected into their body.
Wow.
So getting that out of their system.
4,700
micrograms. And so that goes into their brain,
By
their
what
liver.
age did you say?
2.
So by the time they're 2 years of age, if they get every dose of every vaccine on that pediatric poisoning program.
Wow, that's a video there, Hallie, for Instagram. That's a remarkable amount. I mean, not to mention then we start with the mercury, right? Because here comes the flu shots, and there's still other vaccines that have mercury that crosses right into the brain. And to your point about the aluminum, it's stored in only to come out at different times. Right. So here a girl is going, through her normal cycle, getting her menstruation, and it's normal for hormone changes to lose bone, and out comes some aluminum from the bone. Lead stored in the bone too, by the way.
Yeah, 90% of lead that you're exposed to gets stored into bone.
Yeah.
And so it's you need to chelate that out,
This is what I teach, how to do it correctly.
Yeah, we use the products that we use. I think about the zeolite that we use, the zeolite spray that we use. It's totally safe for pregnant women, breastfeeding women. You can squirt it in the mouth, little babies, all that stuff.
But here's the thing, is detox is not just even about chelators.
No,
I utilize chelators, but you have to
sure.
fix what the cells need to do to get rid of it. And then you have to use other binders so you don't reabsorb it, right?
100%.
And certain chelators are good for certain metals, other ones aren't, and you have to, understand that. But so back to the conversation, I think it's important for people to hear, right? So we've made a few arguments here against vaccines and the problems. The toxicity component, right, which is real. These, the toxins bioaccumulate, the aluminum, the mercury. I mean, all the stuff,
proteins.
all the foreign proteins. But then we made the immune argument that it's stimulating the wrong immune system, if you will. You're not building positive lifetime immunity, but you're creating this hyperimmunity. And that's an argument for why we're seeing this explosion of hyperimmunity and allergies,
autoimmune diseases,
gut conditions,
cancer,
autoimmune diseases,
cancer,
all of it, right? And even now cancers, right? So, but again, I still come back to the argument that we are all going to deal with, but it's the risk versus reward thing here, right? It's like, but God forbid, I don't want my child to get these horrible conditions, right? So therefore, I'm willing to take the risk, because I see a lot of normal kids. How do you combat that?
Again, I think that parents need to know a little bit about each one of these infections, and they need to get their head around the importance of fever, and they need to understand what to do to support a fever, and understand that kids are going to get sick. It's part of living in this environment.
Right.
And what you do about that, what you do to support it, and not to feed them all the sugar and the white sugar and stuff.
Yes.
If they want something sweet for a treat, give them a piece of apple or a piece of orange or something like that that's good for them. And parents need to know that from the time you have a baby, you by definition have taken on some risk. You have
and responsibility.
Yes. And I say that too, that parents that choose to not vaccinate, it's not that they're irresponsible, they're more responsible, because then now they have to do more things to look at their diet and getting them to bed on time and exercise and not be glued to their cell phones and taking vitamin D and taking, some supplements and getting regular chiropractic treatments, because I grew up in a chiropractic family, and my grandfather and my father, 3 uncles and 2 cousins are chiropractors.
Wow.
And that's why I opted to be an osteopath, because I wanted that tool in my toolbox, because of my first chiropractic adjustment was I was probably 2 weeks old. And so I grew up with that, right?
Yeah.
You kind of know what that was. And so parents have to do a little bit of reading. There's a really good book called Turtles All the Way Down. It's kind of a silly name, but it's called Turtles All the Way Down. I recommend it to all parents. It was written by 2 or 3 Israeli pediatricians that wanted to remain anonymous. So they contacted Children's Health Defense, and Mary, Zoe O'Toole and Mary Holland became the editors and the face of that with Children's Health Defense. It's a pretty thick book, but it has over 1,200 footnoted references in it.
Wow.
And it goes through each one of the infections and tells you what the infection is, what to do about it.
It's like Robert Mendelssohn's book, How to Raise Kids Without...
It's like that. And then what about the vaccines and what the downsides are? But I really recommend this for the parent that is like questioning everything, and I want to see proof and I want to see the studies. It's a perfectly good book. It's a really good book.
I think that's you answered that question well, because I think people need a resource, because they're going to be in the next conversation being told how dangerous pertussis is. And they're going to hear a horror story about measles or pertussis, and their girlfriends, brothers, sisters, wife.
That's always the leverage point.
Their child got pertussis,
and
they died. And then when you hear that, stories sell, facts don't. Facts tell, stories sell. So then they're off and they're going to get the vaccine because of that story of the child dying. That's what we're up against. Yeah. So they need a resource. We used Robert Mendelssohn's book, How to Raise Kids Despite Your Medical Doctor.
You.
That was a great resource.
Exactly.
Good old
100%.
Robert Mendelssohn. He was a pediatrician who went against the grain and did exactly what you said. Here's why this condition is not dangerous. Here's why pertussis, if your child gets sick from pertussis, that was a sick child.
Yeah.
I mean, but then the resource allows the parent to go, because it's the fear that everyone puts in. Listen, when a parent vaccinates their child, they now become a proponent for vaccines, because they did it. They want all their friends to do it. And if you don't, then that makes them kind of a bad parent. So therefore, they become very anti people who don't do what they did. I'm just saying that's human.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
But there's also the other side of that story of how many literally millions of parents now believe that their children's illnesses, chronic illnesses, remember that 76% came from the vaccines, including this big spike in autism. And when the Vax movie came out, 10 years ago now? It's been a while.
Has it been that long?
It's been a while. Dell started this movement when he would go around and would be there after the movie to ask questions. I went to a lot of those premieres and was one of the question answerers. And, one of the things that he said is, I want to know how many people that are here have a child with autism and believe that your child changed after they were vaccinated. And 2/3, it would break your heart every time you saw it. 2/3 of the parents would stand up.
Dell just sat in that chair and he just told that story you just told.
And because I saw it myself from standing from the front, because I would ask the same thing. I went to quite a few of those premieres for them as the question answer.
Unfortunately, many of them keep that secret though, because they're afraid of getting shamed by their.
But they're not doing it anymore.
Yeah, things have changed.
When the Vax bus went around the country, they had over 3,000 signatures of children, parents that had triplets that would do it bink, 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 after they had the vaccine, they all clicked off.
You saw Dell's new documentary, right?
Absolutely.
And you can watch it for free. AN, inconveniencestudy.com. Watch it for free. tremendous because it showed what was already done, meaning comparing the vaccinated to the unvaccinated and saying, what is the healthier group? Right. And this was already proven out many, many times, but this time it was done by Henry Ford Health Institution. So this was now, how are they going to argue with this? And he even had a hidden camera because after it showed that not only is the unvaccinated group far healthier with literally zero of the incidents that the vaccinated group was dealing with, 6 times autoimmune, 2.5 times most chronic diseases, including autism, and the unvaccinated group literally 0. Even though it showed that, this was now, he asked the gentleman with a hidden camera, would you do anything different for this study? And he said nothing. It was a perfect study. And so therefore, any argument was taken. Because, by the way, the past ones they criticized, oh, the study wasn't done. It was just done. It wasn't done by a reputable, They found the most reputable. And they did it.
And the other book that I would say that goes along with that is Dr. Brian Hooker's book, Vax, Unvax.
Oh, yeah.
You know, the title of the book is Vax, VAX dash Unvax, let the science speak.
Do you have that on your website, that book?
No, I don't. But you can get it from Amazon.
Okay.
And it's a great book. You can get it from Children's Self Defense. But the thing about that is Brian's a friend of mine. And we were talking about
I want you to tell that story a little bit because Del and I didn't tell that.
Oh, it's a good story. And Brian's a good friend of mine. And he said the book was published, I believe, in 2015. And he said that, at the time, Bobby Kennedy was, all involved with Children's Self Defense. And he called Brian and he said, hey, Brian, I want you to go out and see if there's any studies out there that really compare vaccinated versus unvaccinated, the health of them. And Brian said to me, he kind of said, okay, Bobby, whatever. And he thought in his own mind, he said, this will be like a Saturday afternoon's worth of work because I won't find anything. And then they started digging and digging and digging, and they found 60 well-done studies that compared the health of vaccinated versus unvaccinated people. And that's what they published in this book. And I've got the book in a PDF file. So it's a lot, you can just scroll up and you see there's all these bar graphs of the health of vaccinated versus unvaccinated. And,
this will be another good resource for parents.
This will be all of the, they compare asthma, allergies, Guillain-Barré syndrome, neurological problems, epilepsy, and the vaccinated versus unvaccinated. And I called Brian after I read through the book and I said, this is phenomenal. And he said, well, it was actually written in that manner to be a manual for parents so they could take it and go into their pediatrician's office and say, what about this? And what about this? And what about this? And you see these bar graphs of the yellow versus green. The green is the unvaccinated. The yellow is the vaccinated. And you can actually see the numbers anywhere from 1.5 to 8 times.
And the pediatrician's going
by the
out.
way, that was that's what Del said, is the irony is the statistics that they came up with the Henry Ford study exactly modeled all these other studies that did the same
100%.
thing. It was like same numbers, 6 times autoimmune, 2.5 times autism. I mean, it tells the story. It tells the story.
I don't know if you've spoken to Naomi Wolf about her book, The Pfizer Papers.
No.
It's a phenomenal book. She got access to the 950,000 pages of the Pfizer study that was ordered by the court to be released. And so she and her co-author went through all this. It took them a couple of years, and they divided it into different things and show the incrimination of what Pfizer knew and all of the different diseases. And in this book, it's an oversized, heavy book, and but it's so incriminating. And she had, I don't know, like 1,200 different scientists and researchers and stuff help her to go through it. There's pathology slides, there's MMR or MRI slides, there's all sorts of things in it. And I said to Brian, I said, you could take this book, this Vax Unvax book, you could take Naomi Wolf's book, walk into a court of law, and walk up to the judge, lay this down, and here's my evidence. I rest my case.
Vaxxed versus unvaxxed book. Can you find that on Amazon?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Get that, because that seems like a really simple resource for people.
And it's easy to read. It's meant for parents.
How is it that people searching online for information and they'll find studies, and oftentimes they can find the studies that will support what they want to believe, right? Of course, we know this is true. And Danny, you taught me this, that, you can look at a study, you have to really get into the body of the study, because they can frame something to be written the way they want the public to believe it, even though that's not really the case. And you really have to know how to read the studies.
Well, because the argument is look at all these studies that show that vaccines don't cause autism. Mm-hmm. And it's like, there's never been a real study showing that. And, that's, people don't understand. So the people that are on the anti-vax side look like the anti-science, because they're just bamboozled.
Except the people on the anti-vax side have read the full study. Yeah. When I first started into this investigation back in, 2000, because I've been doing this for 25 years and I've put like 50,000 hours of research into this, probably more than that. Mm-hmm. Because when I'm not sleeping or talking to somebody about this, I'm researching and writing about it. When early on, when I would subscribe to the Pediatric Infectious Disease Journal and to JAMA and to the New England Journal, and I would read these studies, like the full study, and I would get down to the end of the study and go, how in the world did they draw that conclusion? Because just for the general audience, how a study is published in a journal, there'll be an abstract, and then there's one sentence. It's like the conclusion of the study underneath it. And then there's the study.
And that's what the media runs.
And that's what they run, is the conclusion of the abstract. And in you're reading the body of the science of the study, and it'll say, during the course of the study, there were 7 deaths, and the study investigators concluded that it had nothing to do with the vaccines. Yeah. So by the stroke of a pen, it's just negated. And you get down to the end of the study and you go, how in the world, when you read it and the numbers and all the nonsense of what they call placebos, and then you look at the cohorts on the study, and there really was no control group, really the way they should be designed. And you're reading all this, and I've read hundreds and hundreds of them, and it's all the same thing. How did you write this 12-page thing and conclude that at the top? And when doctors read it, and I'll tell you kind of a little funny story about this, that doctors don't read anything but sometimes the abstract, but the conclusion of the abstract. Many years ago, I gave a talk at the Northeast Ohio Osteopathic Association group. And I was there speaking on, I don't know, a couple of supplements that the supplement company wanted me to talk to them about. So before I was speaking on Saturday. So that week before the conference, I stopped at like CVS and I bought a Sports Illustrated magazine. So I flipped through it and I found this little obscure article. So I get up and I give my talk and I'll say, and it was mostly men. I said, how many of you guys subscribe to Sports Illustrated? Well, most hands went up. I said, how many of you read the article on the women's field hockey tournament in Brazil this week? And nobody. No. And I had it tabbed, and I said, "Well, it's here. Look, right here. I just read it." And I said, "None of you read it?" No, nobody read it. I said, "That's exactly what you do with articles that you don't want to know anything about, with nutrition articles, with vaccine articles, with anything that doesn't already fit into your paradigm. You flip right past it, and you swear they don't even publish about it."
And by the way, social media now does it for you.
Yeah,
it gives you what you want and avoids what you don't want.
Right, exactly. Yes. So I said, you don't, you flip by it. And then you swear that they didn't even write about it. There's no such thing about nutrition and renal disease. There's no such thing about nutrition and epilepsy or vaccines. And I'll tell you, at the end of that conference, I was like 2.5 days. And for the couple of weeks after that, I got so many emails and phone calls from doctors that had been there. And they said, busted. You busted me. You were absolutely right. And I'm not going to do that anymore. Because he said, in fact, and some of the people said, in fact, if I'm wanting to just flip right past it, those are the ones now I stop and look at a little bit more closely, because why was I going to just flip right by that and say that it had never even been published?
Right. There's so many, like we said, studies showing that the vaccinated group, has more problems, more illness, right? The Simpson Wood story. Do you know that story?
Yeah.
Could you tell that?
Probably not as well as what I know that at Simpson Wood, they had decided, they looked at the data and saw that
this was a CDC meeting.
There's a CDC meeting
in Atlanta, Georgia.
Atlanta, Georgia. and that they saw that the very high doses of mercury, and that was correlated with autism.
Like a perfect correlation. Literally, the people in the room, what happened in the room, at least the way I remember some of the story being told, was that they were literally saying, look, this can't get out.
Right.
This has to change. We need a study showing the opposite. Like literally, they were like, this can't be.
Well, this can't get out is
And
what
this
they
can't
said.
get out, yeah.
And that there were people on that committee that actually were grandparents, and they're like, all of a sudden they had to stop. They were calling and saying, don't give my kid any more vaccines. That was about 2003 or 2004, because that's when there was all those autism hearings. I was at a lot of those. And that was when at the time there was a subdivision, a subgroup inside of the autism movement called the Mercury Moms. And they were the moms that were really on their high horse because some of their children had gotten as many as 87 milligrams of mercury that were injected into their body.
Yeah.
And so it was Dr. Stephanie Cave. Do you know her?
No.
Dr. Stephanie Cave, she was like my mentor back in 2000 when I started doing this. She's a family doctor, a large autism practice out of Louisiana. And before she went to medical school, she had been teaching at Loyola. She taught chemistry. And so she decided later in life to go to medical school. And when she was looking at the ingredients, she was the one who just did the math and added up all of the mercury that was in all of these vaccines and then took it to Congress. And when she went in to testify in Congress, she said it was me and my attorney and like 12 other attorneys from the pharmaceutical industry on the other side. And she was the one who sort of started that whole movement. And the whole herd ran over to the right, all about mercury. And I was one of the few people standing over out there all by myself going, it's not just the mercury.
It's not just the mercury.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
it's like we're bringing up here. It's not just the toxicants. It's these other immune problems that we're.
And
And it is so frustrating because people will get hung up on, well, they've taken the mercury out. And not that we know it's going to take time, but nonetheless.
Well, back in 2004, when they started that recall, we knew what they did immediately. It was in 2004 when they introduced the flu shot in 6-month-olds with mercury in it. So there was a group of us that were standing over here going, it's not just the mercury. And it was like, we were so livid, and we tried a whole bunch of things early on to get people to see how they were going to reintroduce the mercury back into the schedule through flu shots at 6 months of age. And as they took the mercury out, they were going to exponentially increase the amount of aluminum, which they have.
Well, because people don't understand that it doesn't work without it, meaning you need an adjunct. We already discussed this, and you need something to stimulate the immune system into an antibody reaction.
You know, what's interesting about aluminum, though, if you read any current articles about aluminum and aluminum in general, and the first paragraph will always start out by saying, we've been using aluminum as an adjuvant since the 1920s. We used it with tetanus shots. And at the beginning, what they were trying to use was like all kinds of weird things to stimulate an immune response. They decided on the aluminum, and we've been using it all these years. It's generally recommended as safe, but we've been using it for 100 years and we still don't know how it works.
Yeah, exactly.
We still don't know why it's even in the vaccines.
Yeah, exactly.
Like we still don't. You've been injecting children with a toxic metal for over 100 years and you still don't know what it's doing or why? Yeah. I mean, that's just insane to me.
So in a perfect world where we could have conversations and debate and, bring up these logical points that have validity, that are truly based on real science, that's not going to happen. So at this point, our obviously concerns for people like us is going to be on personal liberty and the freedom to maintain that. And I mean, we can start with that same basic premise of, well, if your vaccines are working, why are you worried about my child being unvaccinated? But that's where do you see that going? Where do you see that the future?
That's a good point, because that is where this conversation tails.
And I hate to say it, but it literally depends on who's in office. I mean, the conservative view is my body, my choice. I mean, ironically enough. And, the opposing view is absolutely, the government knows best. So where do you see that, or how do you see us preserving our ability to maintain that right to choose for ourselves or our families?
I don't know if you watched any of the hearings that Secretary Kennedy has been in. I mean, not only his confirmation hearing, but then those couple of hearings they had about the budget, all stuff. It was so infuriating.
It was.
And I actually
Completely.
wrote a Substack because on the second hearing, a Senator Cassidy, who's also a physician, says, oh, by the way, one of the things that Bobby said about that there's no placebo-controlled trials, he said that's a lie. There's one for
none.
measles, rotavirus, and measles, rotavirus, and I believe the last one was chickenpox, I think. But anyways, I took those three and I said, and I wrote a Substack called Vaccine Lessons for Senators, because there was no placebo-controlled trial of measles in the rotavirus vaccine. And I'll be honest, it took me hours to find this information because in any of the published research, they always use the word placebo, which makes the physician thinks it's a shot of sterile water, but it's not. So I found the Rotarix vaccine. It took me a long time. It took me hours of research to find this. And it was only in a footnote in an article that I read that in the Rotarix virus, and Rotarix is an oral vaccine to ostensibly stop rotavirus diarrhea, which is just like RSV, that almost all kids have rotavirus infections by the time they're 4 years of age. They probably need it maybe more in third world countries where they don't have any ways to hydrate kids if they start to get dehydrated, but they don't need it in this country. The Rotarix placebo, they use Rotarix, and the placebo arm used Rotarix minus the virus. So when the side effects...
Not a true placebo trial.
So when the side effects were the same, it's like, well, no kidding. You were comparing A against A.
But you know what they say about that? The reason is because it would be unethical not to just give water.
Right.
Meaning that we had to give them the treatment because the treatment was so effective, and it would be unethical not to have a group
because the assumption is that they confabulated was that vaccinating keeps kids sick from getting sick and keeps them safe. And you can't withhold a known treatment of value and to do an experiment with them because you're putting them at risk.
So that's what I want people to hear out there. So there are none. There are 0 double-blind placebo trials done on vaccines. It's the only drug. The only drug you do not have to do a double-blind study, which would show causation to all these conditions that we're talking about. If they did double-blind studies, they know this. It would show causation.
100%.
But they won't do it because they can't let this cash cow go away. It's the only drug they can't be sued for, and it's the only drug they don't have to prove that type of safety on. So therefore, this is the $1 trillion industry, and it holds big pharma together.
100%. I remember now what Cassidy had said was that's not true. There were placebo-controlled trials for measles, rotavirus, and Gardasil.
Oh, we can talk about that next.
That's like a noose.
I mean, Gardasil. What was used in the placebo? A shot of aluminum. That was in the trial.
So do you understand that, folks? What she's saying
Gardasil has aluminum, and the placebo was a shot of aluminum.
It should be water. It should be, something that is absolutely benign. So in the placebo group, it's aluminum instead of water, so to speak. It's like, so you're comparing the shot to straight up aluminum.
Wow.
Oh my God, how do they get away with that?
And because there's aluminum in the shot, and the aluminum over here, and the side effects were mostly from the aluminum. Well, they said, the placebo, you had as equal number of side effects from Gardasil as from the placebo.
Oh my gosh. I mean, that's
let's talk briefly about Gardasil. I mean, it's easy to get on YouTube and find videos, but people won't. Just of looking at the consequence, right, of many.
There's a lot of consequences.
Give us some statistics on that vaccine, and of course the fallibility of it, because it only covers how many strains?
9 now.
Out of how many?
170.
Okay.
So you get antibodies to 9, But there's 170.
When you're 9 years of age, because they want to start giving it to girls at 9 years of age and boys at 12, because they don't want the boys to get venereal warts, and that's why. But seriously, the reason that they decided to give it to boys was just to double the market share, you know. But I do a long talk about Gardasil, and you know, it's because the cervix is an external organ. It's like your nose. It's an external organ, and it has. Actually, if you do a bimanual exam and you examine the cervix, it actually kind of feels like the end of your nose. But it's an external organ that has a lot of exposures. Like when you have your period, if you use a tampon, if you use, condoms, when you have the latex exposure, or even if you don't use condoms, sometimes people can have an inflammatory reaction to like semen. There can be different, but it's exposed to stuff.
Right.
And that's another thing that almost every woman has an HPV infection sometime in their life that comes and goes within 2 years. So it's kind of like these other things. They come and go. So it's an external organ that gets exposed. It gets an infection, like your nose would get an infection and comes and goes. When they originally did the research to look for the 4 strains that they put in the first Gardasil vaccine that came out in 2006, they had to pool data worldwide because they couldn't find any women who had not been infected with HPV.
Interesting.
And then they couldn't culture the HPV virus, the human papilloma virus. There was nothing they could do. So they fabricated it and they made a surrogate that looks kind of like it. And that's what's used in the vaccines.
And
it's not even legit.
It's not even the real thing.
Yeah.
It says in the pamphlet, I mean, it can lead to Guillain-Barré syndrome and all these different things.
POTS is a big one.
POTS, so many people have POTS. And again, they're getting away with it. I mean, that is, I can't tell you how many people we know have been damaged by that vaccine.
Yeah.
So many people.
So many. And then the worst, as if it wasn't bad enough already. In my opinion, what is the worst is they're wanting to give this to, 9 to 12-year-old girls and 12 to 15-year-old boys. The 9 to 12-year-old girls are doing it because if you have this risk of cervical cancer, except you don't, and that the most common age group for women to get cervical cancer most commonly is at a minimum in their 30s, but mostly in their 40s and 50s. So you get this shot when you're 9. Do you still have any sort of protective antibody?
Zero.
If it worked at all, do you have anything left?
Right.
No, not at all. But you've taken on all the risk that are attendant with what's injected with that vaccine.
It's unbelievable. All right, let's talk about mRNA.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, good shift.
Because that's,
that was really good. That was a good shift.
Because now, as we know, they're talking about putting it on our vegetables.
And our animals.
Anyways, insane. And why?
It's a new technology. In my opinion, what they should do with that new technology, the mRNA, and even worse, the self-amplifying RNA, the saRNA, which is even 100 times worse. They should look at the carnage that was caused by the COVID shot worldwide. They're now saying at least 20 million people dead from the shot alone.
And how many to come?
Right. And early on, the Expose News out of the UK, which is a really great investigative journal, they felt, this was years ago now, that at least 2.1 billion people worldwide had been injured by that shot. And so they should look at that and look at what happened with the PrEP Act, which I'd like to talk about that a little bit more. But the PrEP Act and all the people that were damaged here by that shot, and could say, it was a trial, didn't work. It was like, we tried it, it failed, it needs to go in the garbage.
Yeah, exactly, right.
And instead it's like, we tried it and we get to do more of it. We're going to do more of it.
Well,
and
they made more money in the shortest period of time ever in the history of their companies.
Despite the fallout.
Yeah, despite the fallout. And it's, it causes carnage. It causes damage in every age group. And now we see the turbo cancers.
Yeah, that wasn't a term before COVID, was it?
No, it wasn't even a term in healthcare before COVID shots. And we're seeing and they call it turbo cancers because of from the time you're diagnosed to the time you're dead can be months, weeks, sometimes even days. I just read a report just a couple days ago of a 15-year-old girl that got a COVID jab and was diagnosed with rapidly aggressive, I think it was leukemia, died of liver failure within a week, died. of getting the shot. And so we're seeing, these are not anecdotal reports. There's thousands and thousands of them. In fact, there were 1.6 million VAERS reports filed from the COVID shots. And the problem with that is that the PrEP Act, and I talk about this.
Explain what the VAERS is.
Well, VAERS is the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System that was developed and part of the National Childhood Injury Compensation Act of 1986. It was like, okay, Congress said, okay, we're going to give the pharmaceutical industry liability protection for these 3 vaccines, MMR, DPT, and polio. Because I've thought about this a lot. I thought if I was in Congress in 1985 and they were really wanting this protection, there's no way they had a crystal ball and knew that as soon as they gave that protection, it was like Fanny bar the door and the ramp up of the vaccine schedule would be what it is today. There's no way of knowing that. So what they did is they said, okay, we'll give you protection for these 3 shots, which were available in 1985, MMR, DPT, and polio. But in exchange for that, we're going to set up this vaccine injury the VAERS program, the Vaccine Adverse Event Program. Is going to be co-monitored by the CDC and the FDA. And we're going to have a place where people can track their injuries, because if they took one for the team and they took the shot and they got injured, we're going to compensate them.
Right.
So at the beginning, it was set up legislatively to be a no contest easy way that if I got a flu shot, a MMR, or whatever, not a flu shot at that time, but MMR, DPT, and I or my child got injured by this vaccine, the government would say, okay, here's a check. Right. Thank you for doing that.
Right.
Which instead it's turned into a multi-year, extremely litigious, very aggressive they call it vaccine court, which is part of the federal court of claims of what it's turned out to be. So VAERS is supposed to monitor.
It's a kangaroo court too.
So VAERS is supposed to monitor what's going on. What was also supposed to happen during that time in 1986, where Congress said, okay, the other thing you're going to do is every 2 years, you are going to submit a report that's going to be presented to Congress through the Secretary of HHS that shows what steps you, pharmaceutical industry, have taken to improve the safety of these vaccines. Since 1986, there has never been one submitted.
Oh my God.
I mean, so the government
one.
was bamboozled. Number one, they were under the assumption there's so few side effects, we'll just write the check.
And so few vaccines.
If there is damage, so few vaccines, we'll write the check based on these statistics that you're giving them, right?
Right.
And that ended up to be, that it went bankrupt.
Right.
By the way, bankrupt. I mean, you can't, meaning like there's like no one's getting paid out.
That's not really true. They paid out over $5 billion worth of claims.
But then didn't they run out of money?
No.
That's what I thought. I thought it ran out of money, like the approved money. And then you have to go through this next step now.
No, what they ran out of, what they did was they shut down the association between vaccines and autism and left 5,000 kids out to dry.
Oh, yeah,
because if they would have adjudicated those 5,000 kids, it would have bankrupted the system.
Okay.
And then some. It would have so they said, we're not going to pay for this.
Not going to pay for this.
Yeah.
And then what else they're not going to pay for are injuries from the COVID jab. Because people, when they got an injury from the COVID jab.
So that's off the table now.
Well, there was never a tabled injury for them, ever. And because they learned about VAERS, they knew about VAERS, 1.6 million people filed claims for injuries with VAERS reports, which was more than the sum total of all of the injuries filed since 1986. But the biggest problem with that is that because of the PrEP Act, which is the Public Readiness and Emergency Preparedness Act of 2005, because of the PrEP Act, there was a provision inside of the PrEP Act that if there was an emergency, a pandemic that was declared, any vaccine that was used during that pandemic is called a countermeasure. We're setting up a countermeasure injury compensation program, but we're not going to create an injury table for it, and we're going to forbid Congress from funding it. So it's been sitting on the books since 2005. So all of those people that got injured were supposed to file their claim with the CICP program, with the Countermeasure Injury Compensation Program. Nobody knew about that. Nobody knew what to do with it. So they all ran over to VAERS. And I say this a lot. I talk about this in detail in my book called, Zero Accountability in a Failed System, because it's a good title, Zero Accountability in a Failed System, because nobody knew about what was happening. And so they went over and they filed it at VAERS. There was only 13,000 people since the inception of the program in 2005, which covered bird flu, swine flu, and now, supposed to be the COVID shot. There were only 30 people that filed reports of a COVID injury with the CICP program that got adjudicated. And of the 30 that got adjudicated, there were 2 that got sizable payouts. If you throw them out as outliers and average the other 38, the average amount of money that these people got for these terrible injuries that are lifetime neurological problems and all sorts of stuff was $4,200.
Oh,
that's it. And there's a 1-year statute of limitations on it. From the time you get the shot, you have to do all the work yourself. You have to hire your own attorney.
Impossible.
You have to file all these different things. And if it's been more than a year since you got your shot, the statute of limitations runs out and you can't file a claim. It's the most nefarious, awful thing that the government has done to vaccinated people ever.
Oh.
And the PrEP Act is now the last thing that Secretary Becerra did before he left office was he went in and extended the protections offered by the PrEP Act up through 2028, I believe.
Oh, wow.
So those people who are all injured, those millions of people that there's been no compensations for any death. There's been no compensations for any of the medical programs. The organization that's doing the most to try to fight this, it's called React 19. I talk about that a lot in my book too. The React 19 is a group of COVID vaccine injured people that are trying to raise money and get money into the hands of these people that are injured. They've been trying to move things with Congress to get the CICP program funded and stonewalled at every turn.
And I'm sure for these poor people that are injured, I mean, just the energy and effort it takes.
They don't even have it.
Right. They don't.
And the other thing is it might be a year before you even figure out that it was the COVID shot that made you sick.
Completely unfair.
Of course.
It's horrible. That's a horrible, horrifying thing.
It's back to freedom, right?
So
just hearing all this, we should have the freedom to vaccinate, to say no. Right? That's the bottom line. I don't care what side of the aisle you're on here. We should have the freedom to say no.
That's right.
The problem is it's the straw man of the unvaccinated or a threat to the vaccinated. That is, talk about that because it's there's no scientific proof to that or truth to that at all.
That's all it needs to be said.
But that's what holds it up. That's what holds up. Why you should be vaccinated is because you're a danger to me.
Well, I think that when you really look at it, it's always follow the money, right? There's a picture that I received. It was about Christmas time last year, and I have permission to use this picture. It's of a young man. He looks like he's about 12, kind of chubby, and the caption blacks out his eyes, and it says "severely vaccine injured as a child, 1 year's worth of medication." And he's sitting in front of a table, and it had at least 50 prescription medication empty bottles for that 1 year. That's why the pharmaceutical industry is after your children, because if they can be captured and become customers for life, think about all the dollars sitting in those 50 prescriptions they're sitting in front of him. That's one child with one severe injury.
Yeah.
Now, not every child has that severe of injury, but almost every fully vaccinated child has something.
Right.
They have eczema, they have allergies.
Absolutely. But see, again, they don't think it's the vaccine.
And they're creating,
so they think their child's fine.
They're so smart because they're creating the drugs that deal with the symptoms from the drugs they've created. I mean, it's just
great business model. Yeah,
it is.
But I mean, I just again, it's that freedom and the straw man they set up is that they did this during COVID. They actually shamed the unvaccinated because 100%. You're stopping herd immunity, which turned out to be a complete farce. I already knew it was a farce. There was no science around it, but they're on television. Fauci. I asked Peter McCullough, should Fauci be in jail? He said he should be in jail.
Absolutely.
They made everyone believe that the unvaccinated were causing a problem for the vaccinated, that they were spreading the illness, they were keeping herd immunity from happening. Number one, the vaccine never causes herd immunity, ever. It was a scientific lie that everyone bought into. And number two, the unvaccinated weren't a threat to the vaccinated. If your dang vaccine worked, go at it. Right. But the fact is if it worked, I'm not a threat to you anyway. but they shamed the people who made the choice.
They learned that each one of these pandemics that have come along since the swine flu in 1976, every one of them has been a market test.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the swine flu, and then we had, bird flu in 2005. I wrote a book during that time in real time called Fowl, spelled FOWL. Bird flu, it's not what you think. It was really an environmental book. And so 2005, and then we had 2007, we had swine flu. Each one of them is market tests. They blow it out until they meet resistance, and then they pull back.
Yeah.
I mean, where did COVID go? Where did bird flu go?
Yeah.
Where did swine flu go? And then they crunch the data and they look at what should we do more of, what worked, what didn't work, just like any market test that you might do on any product, right? Which is, if we've got to get people to look at vaccines as a product. I mean, it's just like buying a car or a refrigerator or a house. If it's a product, you're going to do your research on it first. You're going to look at, pros and cons. If you're going to look at, see if there's a study that was done on safety, you're going to look to see if,
like the Pinot's blowing up.
All of these different, exactly, like car things. And so it was a market test. And then when people pull back, like I can imagine in the next pandemic that they blow out, they're probably not going to have a lottery for college educations, or they're probably not going to have a year of free beer or free donuts or anything like that, because that didn't really work, But what did work was the weaponization of fear.
Yeah.
Oh man!
And if they create enough of that. Yeah. That's how they got their compliance.
I asked Peter, I said, is there another one coming? He said, oh yeah, no, 100%. They already have a plan.
They already have a plan.
Yeah, he said they already have a plan. And the fact is they have to be careful, because if they released it right now, too many people are going to be like, oh no, it's too in our memory, right? What happened? So they're going to be, fought with too much resistance. But if they wait just a little bit, everyone forgets.
I hope that people will say, fool me once, shame on me. Fool me twice, it ain't going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I hope that people really look at it like that, because it's the data capture that they got in this moving into more mRNA vaccines, which, to your question that you asked the first time, now it's the self-amplifying RNA vaccines that never shut off. Mm-hmm. And they already have a rabies vaccine that they're already giving to animals. I talked to a couple of, one of the questions I asked the veterinarians was, that I was talking to about this. I said, so this is a self-amplifying rabies vaccine. So that means that they will continually always be making antibodies against this.
And that sounds okay to you?
And I said, so what about my dog sleeps with me? Is that somehow going to get on me? Right. And they said, nobody's even looked. Nobody even cares. And they also have there's like 4 or 5 other self-amplifying vaccines
so
already do.
Easy to deal with. It's like all you have to do is take out rabid animals. It's like
and it's not an issue for most pets, right? I mean, if your animal's out in the wild and all of that, but for domesticated animals
that they go outside pets, with you on a walk or to do their business and they're back in the house.
It is.
Why do we have to do
issue.
this?
That's a whole other conversation we've had with vets, by the way, on the show. Yeah. But every vet is so afraid to stand up against that sacred cow. I mean, if you speak against the rabies vaccine or animal vaccines at all, I mean, they'll take you out.
Yep,
you lose your license. Yep. Yeah. I mean, it's terrible. I mean, is this true? Do pediatricians get penalized if they don't have a certain percentage?
No, but they get rewarded if they get it.
But they get rewards. They don't get penalized.
They get trips.
But they actually get rewarded.
No, they get cash.
Yeah. For a certain percentage that they get vaccinated. Well, that explains part of the reason why they're so emotional about the topic, because they want their vacation
and
check,
they would
whatever.
If they really cared, right, at a level that is required to resist or even support a parent who doesn't want to do that, I do think that it really causes them to question their everything, their code of ethics by which they're functioning, their profession that pays their bills and that they're invested in. I mean, it's a whole...
Yeah, but remember though, they would rather just get... If they believe that these vaccines are good and they get money for it,
that's why they're not questioning it.
They don't want to ever question it, because then they have a problem.
Right.
Because I have to turn down this certain percentage of money coming into my practice if I change my philosophy. Oh, and then what do I do with all the kids that I damaged?
Fight the system.
That's a philosophical problem there too. So they would rather just not read the paragraph. if you will.
And when the child gets damaged, just say it has nothing to do with the vaccine. They were going to have anaphylactic shock anyways.
Right.
Yeah.
They were going to have SIDS and die anyway.
We had a patient of mine back when I was in practice. She took her 2 boys in to get a well visit, and she didn't plan on getting vaccinated. They convinced, the doctor convinced them to do it, right? She had a cap on her boy's head on the way in. She took it off. Said this just happened to happen. Put it in the car, brought the kids in, convinced them to get vaccinated. The boys started screaming bloody murder. He'll be fine. It's as we see this all the time. He's afraid of the shot, the pain, and she's like, she could tell that this wasn't that, and it was something abnormal. She got back in the car in a state of frenzy about what just happened, right? And she went to put the cap back on his head, and it didn't fit. Wow. He had that encephalitis like that. Went back in and said, in tears, you know who this is, by the way, and in tears and said, my son's hat won't go on. His head's inflamed. That's the problem. I mean, and he said, there's nothing. Your son's probably just sick. He has made up some bogus excuse for, not even accepting what she just said, and that this kid was still screaming, never was the same after that.
Yeah, that's the problem, is that parents have been dismissed forever.
Yeah.
What they see with their own eyes.
Yes.
And nobody knows their child better than a mother.
Yep, that's right.
Mm-hmm.
And second to that, a father, that's really involved in caring for their children. Nobody knows them better. And they've been dismissed. They've been shamed. They've been told they're crazy, told that has, your eyes are lying. There's nothing to it. And just because all the kids get a high-pitched screaming thing doesn't mean that it's normal.
Yeah.
Or that, we see this all the time. Well, then what's wrong with you?
Yeah.
Do something about this.
Yep.
And now that's why they're pushing for in democratically run cities and states where they are pushing for parents to not have rights.
Exactly.
Because if they can control and supersede the power of the parent, then they have everything they need.
Right.
And that is so back to the topic of freedom. Right.
Yeah.
Back to being, how do we protect our rights?
That's one of the things I talk about in my book. When I talk about the book, Zero Accountability, I always tell that, if you've been in this for a long time, you're still going to learn stuff that you didn't know. Suzanne Humphreys wrote the foreword, and when she read the book, she said, I didn't know this stuff.
Yeah, tell them how to get your book, because Adele Bigtree, you had said, he read it. He's like, normally I don't read a lot of the books. So you were on his show just a week or so ago, a couple weeks ago, whatever it was. He was like, I learned stuff I had no idea. So, but it's good for a parent who doesn't know anything.
Yeah, that's what
it's good for someone who's been
in it for a long time.
Someone like us, that we've been in this for a long time.
Did you bring a copy? Do you have a book?
I was shipped it. We can't find it. Long story.
Okay.
So I've yet to read it. It was a long
So I'm
story.
gonna
It was
send
shipped
another
because of our house not getting mail. Long story.
Yeah. So there's something in there for everybody, even if you've been doing this for a long time. And for new people, it's going to be a lot of eye-opening stuff. And one of the reasons I brought that up is because
what was the name of the book?
It's called Zero Accountability in a Failed System: How Big Pharma Weaponizes Vaccines, Public Health, and the Law. And there's this whole series that started in 1980 called the Healthy People Program. And every decade, the U.S. Surgeon General puts out goals for the United States for the next 10 years in these decades. And every year, we started out with 43, and now we have over 1,200 ways that the camel can put his to look at you. And one of them things that started in the decade from 2010 to 2020, that was called the decade of vaccines, that Bill Gates made all the vaccines harder. And then starting in 2020, now there's something called the social determinants of health, which go along with what you were saying about taking away parental rights. These are why when you go to the pediatrician with your teenager, why they want to talk to the teenager alone and ask the teenager, are you safe? Do your parents argue? Are there guns in your house? Do you have all of these different...
Yeah, they argue. There's guns in the house. Oh my God. out.
There's so these social determinants of health create a scoring system, and it's all this electronic stuff that they're now doing with Palantir and all of the surveillance, all the data that when you go in to see your doctor, if your doctor has electronic medical records, and I talk about this a lot in the book about electronic medical records, it was one of the several steps that weaponize healthcare against every person that goes in to see their doctor.
Wow. So the message is, forget the well baby visits. You do not need to know the size of your child's head.
But she's not giving medical advice.
And I'm not giving, I have no degree.
You can do that. You can download the forms off the internet.
Yeah.
And you have a tape measure. You can measure it around, and you can measure the length of your baby. You can stand on a bathroom scale and have your husband hand you the baby, and you can do the math.
We didn't
Well, we
measure
all know that
heads.
well baby visits are about vaccination.
Exactly.
Well,
100%.
That's right. And I mean, truly, you know if your child's thriving, right? You know if your child's healthy.
Really, absolutely, we alluded to this. We talked about this a little bit before. You need to have somebody in your life that has raised children.
Absolutely.
You know, whether it's your mother, your grandmother, your sister, your next door neighbor that's a nurse practitioner, somebody in your yoga, in your yoga class,
chiropractor,
in your yoga class, somebody at your church, you know, somebody that's raised children.
Yes.
You know, that
it's not rocket science.
No, I have a funny story. It was a friend of mine. He was the 7th kid in his family. And when he got to be about 10 years old, he asked his parents if he was adopted. And they said, no. Why do you say that? Well, because there's all these baby pictures of my siblings, but there aren't any baby sisters. Because nothing he did was novel anymore. We saw him all roll over and stand up and learn to talk and all this other stuff. Yeah, exactly. And that's the sort of person that when you have this new little life that is brand new to you, so everything they do, you just don't know. And so, or scary. And so you need to talk to somebody who's raised children, or a chiropractor that's been around a zillion kids, and have them say, not to worry. Or, you know, that is a little bit concerning.
We joke about that with our kids, right? The first one falls down the steps. Oh my God. By the third and the fourth, it's like, it's like, any blood? Yeah, you'll be all right. You know, it's like,
can you move everything?
Nothing freaks you out anymore. You're sick. Yeah, go back to bed.
So true.
Do I have a fever? I don't know. It's good if
Let
you do.
Let me feel your head. Yeah,
exactly.
you have a fever.
Yeah, exactly.
You're fine.
I have a stomach ache. What'd you eat? Go bed. Yeah, exactly. I mean, honestly, it is that way. But with first parents, you're freaked out.
You have a cold.
You are. And I think that we've lost something in our multi-generational parenting. You know, that we don't go talk to our mother or grandmother or sister. We got to take them to the pediatrician. You know, I did a seminar a few years ago at the Holistic Moms Association, and at lunchtime, we went into this big room. There was a 12-top table, and I sat down with the young gals, and I started talking to them. And I said, I have a question for all of you, and this is not a gotcha question. I really want to know what your thinking is. And they said, okay. And I said, why do you think you need a pediatrician? And they all just kind of looked around the table and looked at each other.
My child gets sick.
No, this one girl said, because everybody else has one. Which is kind of true, because all these young moms are like, well, my pediatrician and my pediatrician, like it's you, like your pet dog or something, you know?
Yeah, but you know what I think a pediatrician is? A security blanket for people.
Yes, I agree with you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I totally agree.
Yeah,
with you.
because it's like that thing of like, you need somebody to call back to your answer of you just need that person in your life to be like, oh yeah, that's normal. You're good. Yep. Oh yeah, my kid always ran one of 5 fevers. Yep, you're good. Yeah, that's it. Or the books, right? The resources.
Or the books.
Because that's what people want a pediatrician for, because they're scared.
Yeah, and I get that.
Yeah, sure.
But you just need somebody who understands children, has gone through it, and can advise you appropriately of when this is a concern and when it's not, because they've seen it.
The danger of the pediatrician is even beyond the vaccine thing. The danger is you end up, your kid goes and he has a flu and they end up on an antibiotic.
Right.
He has a sinus infection, an earache, and they end up on a Z-Pack or an antibiotic. That's the big danger. Again and again and again. Now, today we know more. 1 round of antibiotic takes a year for the microbiome to recover. And it's every earache. So every time you go, a pediatrician feels the need to give you something, because that's why you're there. If you go into the pediatrician, they'll be like, oh, he's fine, take him home. You're going to stop going, right? But if you give the child something, then you feel good as a parent. You feel like I went there and it was good. And here's the medicine.
Or you got your money's worth.
My dad would throw it all in the trash. I didn't go to doctors. It was only because he had an old world philosophy, because he was raised by my Italian grandmother. We didn't take, I remember I chopped my finger off and I said, Dad, remember, I have to take those antibiotics, blah, 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 3 times a day or whatever it was. And he goes, you don't need them. Threw them in the trash.
Oh, wow.
We'll keep it clean. And that's what he did. I mean, that was my dad's philosophy. I didn't get cough syrups. When I was sick, I didn't get things, right? We didn't get things. We raised our kids the same way. Like, we don't give our kids stuff when they're sick, right? It's like, just, you'll be all right,
that was, my dad was a chiropractor too, and when the kids would come in, they would bring the kids in if they had an ear infection or a fever, and my dad would adjust them and then break the fever.
No, we did that.
And then he would always say, if you don't cry, I'm going to give you a treat. And what his treat was, he had a bottle of, I remember them distinctly. There was cherry and lemon chewable vitamin C's. They were Shackley vitamins.
Oh, yeah.
And that was their treat for not crying if they got their adjustment.
Listen, I'm not recommending this to anybody, but you know what my father did? If I had a toothache, he'd put scotch on it.
Well, we use clove, right? We rub clove on our babies' gums.
Yeah,
when they were teething.
Exactly. Yeah, I think we gave our kids more things for sickness than my father did, meaning we gave them more natural things. Like, we would give them things to help their immune system, right? But we didn't give them ever Tylenol. Our kids never took a drug in their life. We say that. Our kids never been on an antibiotic, right? It's like, so, it's a philosophy, a major premise that is part of the problem. Most parents today are under this major premise that to get well, you need pills. Right? Yeah. It's like, I was just raised differently, that your body heals and sickness is good. I think as parents, we need to reframe that in kids. Sickness is your body's getting healthier. I was taught that.
I don't think it's just parents. I think it's our whole society.
Our whole society needs that lesson.
It needs that lesson, and it is under this umbrella of pills.
Yeah.
It's like cradle to grave, pills for each area of your life, antidepressants and hormones and, anything that ails you, you've got to have a pill for that. Yeah. And we had talked about this a little bit earlier about how, people in our generation they'll do all the natural stuff, but as soon as they get a diagnosis of, say, cancer or they're jumping right back over into the conventional pot and getting on all these drugs. Yep. And then a couple years later, they mosey back over into your mine office and go, I went off of all these drugs. How do I get off of them?
Yeah, it's almost like real medicine. If I had something really wrong, I'd go to the real hold on a second. It's not real medicine. Real medicine was what God put in you.
Right. Exactly.
It's like
100%.
We got it all wrong. So
that's 100% true.
Yeah.
So Sherry, if there was something that you had words of wisdom for a parent, what do you feel is the most important thing for them to keep front and center in their mind when they're raising, whether it's their baby, their child, or even themselves for that matter?
Well, first and foremost is your relationship with God. Your spirituality, if you have things in line with your walk with Jesus and your relationship with God, and you eat appropriately and eat clean and get to bed on time and follow the 10 commandments, which really tell you a lot. Right. A lot of these other things will taken care of. So I think the first step is your relationship with God. The second step is your relationship with your spouse, and your family. Make sure that you're close with your family and, you include those decisions. But thirdly, and I would say it's not 1, 2, 3, it's kind of 1, 2, 3 across this way.
Sure.
Is don't inject your baby with anything until you've educated. And, I always say that, when you get pregnant, God has given you 2 immediate gifts. The first gift, and particularly now with the fertility rates all around the world dropping so much, the first gift is that you got pregnant.
Right.
And that's a really big gift, especially now and going forward. The second gift is you've got somewhere between 3 and 6 months to get ready for this new life that's going to be that's going to be in your hands for ever. Forever. It doesn't just stop, somewhere along the line. And so you need to get prepared for food and breastfeeding and diapers and, you know, and you need to really get educated about vaccines because you are going to be under immense pressure. And the time that you should be deciding on whether or not to inject that newborn baby with something that could affect its entire life should not be when you're in labor. You know, there's a lot of things going on when you're in labor, you know, and a lot of pain, a lot of all kinds of stuff that's going on. And you should have already firmly made that decision long before you have Braxton Hicks and you go into labor.
Absolutely.
So I think that, and if you are late to the game and you maybe haven't done all of your homework, remember you can always vaccinate. You can never unvaccinate. So you can always wait. There's
very
no
good advice.
urgency.
Yes.
And that, you know, they only have all of these vaccine things set up at 2, 4, and 6 months based on those are your insurance days.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah,
Really?
The insurance set up well baby visits at 2, 4, and 6 months. There's nothing to say your child has to have any of those. Take your time. Know that any one of those injections can be a life-altering event, even death, you know, to one of your kids. So you can always vaccinate. You can never unvaccinate. Take your time, read some books, watch some videos, get my book, listen to your videos, you know, do all of these different things and get prepared for this lifetime of responsibility. Yeah, it's super fun to be able to decide what color the nursery is going to be and have, you know, all these, you know, have a baby shower. That's the fun part of babies.
Yeah, but there's nothing more important than this part.
But there's no responsibility with that. That's just the fun part.
Right.
The hard stuff is you really have to look at bringing in this new life, like getting a college education. You have to know what to do, when, and why. And then the more you learn on the first one, the less you have to do for the second one.
It's so
and
true.
the less you have to do for the third one because
Case
you've
in
already
point.
done the heavy
Yeah.
lifting on the front end, and it'll just be easier as time goes on.
I was going to say, and if you're one of those people that just tends to feel that you do what you're told, think about it this way. Selfishly, if something happens to your baby, that changes your life forever.
And doesn't affect
That's
them
hard.
at all.
Yeah,
That's right.
it's true.
So like, I mean,
that should be enough to make you do the research.
right?
Give them your website again, where they get your books, because they're going to need. That was perfect. We challenged them to do it. Now let's give them the resources.
Yeah. Well, our big resource, really, there's a couple things. One is drtdetox.com is like where we send people to get healthy. Our main website is dr10penny.com. There's no period in there.
dr10penny.com. They can get all those educational pieces.
They can get all the educational pieces.
Yep.
They can find my Substacks. I do 2 Substacks a week. One on Saturday that's called Eye on the Evidence. That's medical related or current events. And then I do one on Sunday called 10 Penny Walk with God.
There you go.
That's Substack.com. It's
That's
like my
awesome.
spiritual one that comes out. And then they can get my book there, which is a Zero Accountability in a Failed System. And if you get it and you like it, please go to Amazon and write a review because that really helps us. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Do it, Dr. Sherry Tenpenny.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank
Wealth
you
of
so
knowledge.
much.
Share and like this
Thank
show. Nothing more important right now, I believe, than this topic.
Absolutely.
Put it out there.